Chapter 1. Dawn on the Emerald Island, 1800 to 1844. At the beginning of the 19th century, Ireland was one of the most densely populated and fastest growing places in Europe. In just 60 years, the population had skyrocketed from 4 million to over 8 million. What sustained this small island, deprived of resources by colonial rule? An average Irish farming family could survive on just a small acre of land if they grew potatoes. This crop contained almost all the necessary vitamins, iron, and calcium. An adult Irishman at that time could eat up to 5 to 6 kilograms of potatoes a day. This prosperity was, in fact, a castle built on sand. The land in Ireland did not belong to the Irish people. It belonged to the English landowners. The Irish farmers were merely tenants. Subdivision system. Because the population grew so rapidly, plots of land were divided among the sons of each family, to the point that they became too small to grow anything other than potatoes. Monoculture of the Irish lumber variety. To maximize yields on tiny plots of land, they only selected a single potato variety. This created genetic homogeneity, making the entire national food system extremely vulnerable to disease. Chapter 2. The Dark Autumn, 1845. In the summer of 1845, the weather in Ireland turned unusually damp and cold. Winds from the southwest carried something the people had never seen before. Text displayed, Phytophthora infestans, the silent killer. Commentary. Early in the morning, the fields were still green. By afternoon, black spots began to appear on the leaves. The next morning, the entire field was nothing but a pile of rotting black mud with a pungent stench that contemporary historians described as the smell of death. At that time, British Prime Minister Robert Peel made initial relief efforts by secretly buying corn from America. But the problem was, the Irish didn't know how to process corn. They called it Peel's sulfur because it was too hard. When the Peel government collapsed, his successor, Lord John Russell, implemented the laissez-faire doctrine, free market. Text displayed, Charles Trevelyan, architect of indifference. Trevelyan, who directly oversaw the relief efforts, believed the famine was God's will to teach the Irish a lesson in self-reliance. He halted free food distribution programs, believing the market would self-regulate. This was the greatest mistake in the history of economics. Chapter 3. The Paradox of Surplus, 1846. While thousands began starving in western counties like Cork and Mayo, the ports of Dublin and Belfast remained bustling. The factual data. In 1846, Ireland exported millions of tons of wheat, barley, pork, and cheese to England. Analysis. Farmers were forced to sell their grain to pay rent to their English landowners, or they would be evicted. They kept potatoes to eat, but the potatoes rotted. The result? They starved to death on the very land that was generating a food surplus for another country. With nothing left to eat, people flocked to the workhouses. To get in, you had to prove you were completely penniless. Families were torn apart. Husbands went one way, wives another, children yet another. Many people never saw each other one last time. Epidemics. Cholera and typhus outbreaks occurred here. Those who survived the famine succumbed to bacteria. Chapter 4, 1847. Black 47, the peak of the disaster. This is the most humanistically detailed chapter for your video. The winter of 1847 was the coldest winter in Irish history. Homeless people lay dead along the roadsides. Historians recorded, people no longer wept, for their tears had dried up and they had no strength left to cry. Text displayed, 300,000 families dismissed. When rents went unpaid, landowners began a land clearing campaign. They used crowbars to demolish the roofs of farmers' homes in the middle of the winter night. Once the roofs were removed, the farmers no longer had the right to reside there. Images of bare, dilapidated houses spread across the island. Chapter 5, The Despicable Escape, 1847 to 1849. By 1847, the Irish people realized that the British government would not change its bailout policy. Their only choice was leave or die. Those with the last vestiges of their possessions, or those sponsored by landowners, essentially paying to get rid of them from their land, flocked to seaports such as Cork, Dublin, and Liverpool. Text displayed: Journey to the New World, Dream or Nightmare. Why were they called coffin ships? Technically, these were old, makeshift wooden transport ships temporarily repurposed to carry people. Sanitary conditions. The distance between decks was less than 1.5 meters. Hundreds of people were crammed into the darkness, with no ventilation. Food on board. By law, the ship's owner had to provide water and grain, but in reality, the water was often contaminated and the grain moldy. Diseases. Typhus, known as ship fever, spread like wildfire. In the damp and cramped environment, one infected person meant the entire ship's compartment was doomed. Chapter 6. The death records at sea. Among the thousands of ships that departed, some names have gone down in the dark history of maritime history. The Elizabeth and Sarah set sail in 1847. It was only permitted to carry 212 people, but was crammed with 276. Upon arrival, more than 40 were dead, and the rest were nothing but skeletons. The Larch, a prime example of horror. Of its 440 passengers, 108 died at sea, and another 150 succumbed shortly after docking. Historians record the account of a doctor on board. The groans of the dying mingled with the sound of the waves. We had to throw the corpses into the sea every morning without time for funerals. The Atlantic had become a giant Irish graveyard. Chapter 7. Gross Island and the Wall of Tears, Canada. Before entering the United States, many ships were forced to stop at quarantine stations in Canada, most famously Gross Island, Grosse Ile, near Quebec. In the summer of 1847, dozens of ships lined up waiting to dock. But on board, thousands of people were dead or dying. The medical facilities on Grosse Island were quickly overwhelmed. The scene was horrific. Survivors had to sleep next to unburied corpses. Priests and doctors on the island also contracted the disease and died in droves while trying to help the migrants. Text displayed: 1847, the summer of death on Grosse Island. Thousands of Irish children lost both parents on this journey. They arrived in Canada and the United States without a single relative or a penny to their name. This marked the beginning of a generation of immigrants who were resilient, but also deeply traumatized. Chapter 8. Survivors arriving in freedom. Although there wasn't a Statue of Liberty like today, the ports of New York and Boston were symbols of hope. However, the welcome for the Irish was far from warm. Religious prejudice. America at that time was predominantly Protestant, and they viewed the Catholic Irish with suspicion, considering them Pope's agents. Economic prejudice. Locals feared the Irish would lower their wages because they were willing to do anything to earn a living. The Irish were confined to dilapidated housing estates, tenements. But it was in these most wretched places that they began to build networks of mutual support. They formed Hibernian societies. They took on the most dangerous jobs, building the transatlantic railroad and digging the Erie Canal. Every mile of railway or canal at that time was stained with the blood of an Irish immigrant. Chapter 9. Early days in the melting pot. 1850, 1870. Upon arriving in America, the Irish had nothing but their physical labor. They concentrated in major urban centers like 5 Points in New York and the South End in Boston. These areas had the highest population densities and the worst living conditions in the world at the time. On-screen text: 5 Points, New York, the epicenter of destitution. Living in darkness, Irish immigrant families often shared cramped, damp basements with multiple other families. Cholera and tuberculosis swept through these tenements annually, meaning the average life expectancy for an Irish immigrant after landing was only about 6 years. The Nina stigma signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" were posted outside shops and factories. They were portrayed in satirical magazines as ape-like, unintelligent, and inherently prone to alcoholism. Rejected from white-collar jobs, the Irish became the muscle that built America's infrastructure. The Erie Canal and railroads. They were the hands that dug vital canals and laid the first tracks of the Transcontinental Railroad. Hazardous work. Jobs that locals refused because they were too dangerous, such as coal mining in Pennsylvania or policing crime-ridden neighborhoods, were taken by the Irish. Chapter 10. The power of solidarity and the politics of the ballot. Unlike many other immigrant groups, the Irish bonded tightly around the Catholic Church. The church was not just a place of worship, it was a social service hub, providing schools and hospitals for the poor. This cohesion created an exceptionally well-organized community. The Irish quickly realized that while they lacked money, they were rich in ballots. By uniting, they began to control the political machinery of the Democratic Party, most famously through Tammany Hall in New York. The patronage system. Irish politicians promised jobs and assistance to new arrivals in exchange for their votes. The Ascent. By the 1880s, Irish Americans began holding offices as mayors and congressmen, and they controlled the police and fire departments in America's largest cities. Chapter 11, the legacy of resilience. From Kennedy to the present. In just 3 to 4 generations, the descendants of those who stepped off the coffin ships completed the journey from the slums to Ivy League universities like Harvard and Yale, the pinnacle of power. In 1960, John F. Kennedy became the first Catholic president of the United States, a milestone that permanently signaled the end of systemic anti-Irish prejudice. Modern demographics. Today, over 32 million Americans, about 10% of the population, claim Irish ancestry. This figure is nearly 7 times the current population of Ireland itself. On-screen text, the Irish Americans, from refugees to nation builders. The famine did more than leave a scar. It forged a fighting Irish spirit. It shaped American culture, from the vibrant St. Patrick's Day parades to a relentless work ethic and political savvy. Chapter 12, the final lesson of the Great Catastrophe. The Irish famine teaches us that migration is not a problem. Migration is a solution for survival. The refugees despised today may very well be the architects of a nation's future tomorrow. Narrative. On the cliffs of County Mayo, the old stone walls still stand as scars of 1,847. But across the ocean, in the skyscrapers of New York and Chicago, the blood of those farmers still flows. The potato famine may have attempted to destroy a people, but it only made them stronger, scattering them across the globe to sow the seeds of resilience. History never ends. It simply migrates from one continent to another.